What if I told you wars don't actually start on battlefields? They start years earlier, inside ideas, quiet theories, hidden assumptions, decisions made by a few people who believe they understand how the world works. And here's the part most people never realize: many of today's conflicts were predicted long before they happened. The question is, if we already knew, why did history still repeat itself? Today in this video, we're breaking down 5 powerful theories that explain global conflicts, starting from number 5 all the way to the one theory that reveals the darkest truth about how the world really works. Number 5. It was never about power. It was about resources. Let's start with a moment that changed the Middle East forever. In 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait in a matter of hours. On the surface, it looked like a political dispute. But underneath, it was something much deeper. Kuwait held massive oil reserves, and in a world driven by energy, that meant power. Suddenly, this wasn't just a regional conflict. It became global. The United States stepped in, alliances formed overnight, and the Gulf War began. And here's the part most people miss: this wasn't just about one country taking another. It was about who controls the fuel that powers entire economies. Now pause for a second. This wasn't the first time this pattern appeared. Go back to World War II, and you'll see Japan expanding across Asia, not just for dominance, but because it lacked natural resources needed to survive. Germany pushed eastward with similar motivations. And suddenly, a pattern emerges. Wars are rarely just about pride or politics. They are about control over what the world depends on. And here's the twist. These wars are almost never presented that way. They're framed as defense, security, or liberation. But beneath the surface, it's often about oil, land, trade routes, or strategic access. Once you see that, you start to realize something uncomfortable. The world doesn't just fight over beliefs. It fights over survival. And survival, in many cases, is tied directly to resources. Number 4. When identity becomes the battlefield. Now imagine a conflict where neither side is fighting for land or money, but for something far more personal: identity. This is exactly what unfolded during the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. What began as political instability quickly turned into violent conflict between ethnic and religious groups who had lived side by side for decades. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Communities fractured overnight. And suddenly, the conflict wasn't about territory anymore. It was about who belonged and who didn't. And once a conflict reaches that level, it becomes incredibly difficult to stop. This is where the clash of civilizations theory begins to feel real. The idea that conflicts are not just between nations, but between cultures, beliefs, and identities. And when identity is involved, compromise becomes almost impossible. Because it doesn't feel like negotiation. It feels like losing a part of yourself. Now think about modern tensions around the world. Whether it's cultural divides, ideological clashes, or religious conflicts, the pattern continues. These aren't just political disagreements. They're deeply human struggles over identity and belonging. And that's what makes them so difficult to resolve. Because you can redraw borders. You can sign agreements. But identity doesn't change that easily. Number 3. The moment rising powers become dangerous. History has a strange pattern. The most dangerous moment is not when a country is weak, but when it's rising. Let's go back thousands of years to ancient Greece. Athens was growing rapidly, becoming stronger, richer, and more influential. Sparta, already a dominant power, watched this rise with increasing fear. And that fear led to one of the most famous conflicts in history, the Peloponnesian War. And here's what makes this moment so important. It wasn't inevitable until fear entered the equation. Once fear took hold, conflict became almost unavoidable. Now fast forward to the 20th century. Before World War I, Germany was rapidly industrializing, expanding its military, and challenging Britain's global dominance. The tension built slowly, almost invisibly, until one event triggered a global war. And that's the dangerous part. These tensions don't explode overnight. They build quietly, beneath the surface, until one moment changes everything. And now, look at today. The United States has been the dominant global power for decades. But China is rising, economically, technologically, and militarily. And suddenly, the same pattern begins to appear again. Which raises an uncomfortable question. Are we watching history repeat itself in real time, just with different countries and higher stakes? Here's the part that makes this theory so unsettling. Wars don't always happen because one side wants conflict. Sometimes, they happen because both sides feel threatened. The dominant power fears losing control. The rising power feels restricted. And in that tension, even small events can escalate into something much bigger. It's not aggression that drives these moments. It's fear. And history shows that fear, when combined with power, can be incredibly dangerous. And once that cycle begins, stopping it becomes far more difficult than anyone expects. Number 2. The illusion of global stability. After World War II, the world entered a period that many consider relatively stable. Global institutions were created. Trade systems expanded. Alliances formed. And at the center of it all was one dominant power, the United States. And for a while, it worked. The system created predictability, and predictability created a sense of global order that many people assumed would last. For decades, this system held together. But here's what most people don't realize. That stability wasn't natural. It was maintained. Carefully, consistently, and sometimes forcefully. And the moment that maintenance weakens, the illusion of stability begins to fade faster than expected. This is the idea behind hegemonic stability theory, the belief that global peace exists when one powerful nation sets the rules and enforces them. But what happens when that power begins to shift? Because history shows that power never stays in one place forever, and when it moves, the system built around it starts to shake. Look at recent years. Global tensions are rising. New alliances are forming. Old ones are being tested. Economic competition is intensifying. And suddenly, the system that once felt stable starts to look uncertain. And uncertainty is where instability begins. Because when no one is clearly in charge, everyone starts acting in their own interest at the same time. History shows that when dominant powers weaken, the world doesn't simply adjust. It reshapes itself. And that process is rarely peaceful. Because when rules are no longer clear, every nation begins to act in its own interest. And that's when instability begins to grow. The question isn't whether global power is shifting. The question is what happens next when it does. And history suggests that answer is rarely simple. Number 1. The dark reality no one wants to admit. Now we reach the theory that explains everything, and at the same time, offers no easy solution. Realism. The idea that the world is not governed by trust, cooperation, or morality, but by survival. And once you accept that idea, the way you see global events begins to change completely. There is no global authority controlling everything. No system that guarantees safety. Every nation is ultimately responsible for protecting itself. And that changes everything. Because in a world like this, even peaceful intentions can be misunderstood, and every action can trigger a reaction. Because when one country increases its military strength to feel secure, others see it as a threat. So they respond. They build more. They prepare more. And suddenly, even peaceful intentions start to look dangerous. And before anyone realizes it, a cycle has begun that no one fully controls anymore. This is known as the security dilemma. And it explains why conflicts can emerge even when no one actually wants war. Think about the Cold War. Two superpowers, both claiming to defend themselves, both building massive arsenals. Neither side wanted direct conflict, yet the world lived on the edge of nuclear war for decades. And that tension didn't exist because of one bad decision. It existed because both sides were reacting to each other. And here's what makes this theory so powerful. It doesn't blame leaders. It doesn't blame specific countries. It suggests that this pattern is built into the system itself, and in a world without complete trust, every decision becomes a calculation. Every move becomes a signal. And every signal can be misinterpreted. Which leads to one uncomfortable realization. If this theory is right, then war isn't always the result of bad decisions. Sometimes, it's the result of how the world is structured. And once you see these patterns, history stops feeling random and starts feeling predictable in the most unsettling way. The real question is, are we learning from the past, or slowly repeating it again in real time? If you want to be smarter every day, like and subscribe.